Imagine yourself under a starry sky, around the warm glow of a sacred fire, where speakers gather to share their wisdom and insights. Creating a sacred space where all are welcome to warm their hands. Here are your hosts, Sarenth Odinson, Snow, Cabra, and Emily Streaking Fate. Discuss spirituality, mythology, animism, and culture around a virtual sacred fire. Won't you join us around Grandfather Fire?
Hail to the way walkers. Hail to the ancestors who show us the ways. Hail to the spirits who walk with us. O blessed ones who have made the path we walk. O blessed ones who have walked the path we walk. O blessed ones who walk with us as we walk. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Holy ones all, above, below, and between. Thank you for your guidance, your clarity, and your strength. Thank you for your beauty, your power, and your might. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Blessed ones who forge good ways, blessed ones who pass on good ways, blessed ones who make the ways whole. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Almighty ones who call us to work, almighty ones who call us to be, almighty ones who call us. Thank you for the calling. Thank you for the calling. Thank you for the calling. Oh, blessed ones, we thank you for the work of our hands, for the work of our minds, and the work of our souls. Oh, blessed ones, we thank you. We thank you, and we thank you, and we thank you. On bended knee, on steady feet, with breath and life, sweet and sure, we thank you. Thank you for elders and ancestors. Thank you for paths and power, and thank you for all your blessings. Hail to you all. This to hail. Welcome, welcome, welcome to Around Grandfather Fire. This is episode 151. I am flying solo tonight. The co-hosts are tapped out tonight. It is just Sarenth Odinson tonight. So, I'm doing well. My recovery has been progressing apace. I'm not completely out of the woods, but I'm here, and I'm very, very happy and pleased to be recording this episode. A lot of the work that I've been doing for the last couple of weeks has been working on prayers and articles in my blog. I just recently posted about how the relationship that I carry with various plant spirits has changed over the years, especially since starting my Patreon topic exchange with folks. And there's an exploration of that on my WordPress blog, which is sarenth.wordpress.com. I have also been exploring different prayers. The most recent one is called a paean, which is a very old form of writing praise poetry. And this one, which is going to post in a week or two, is a paean to the 9 worlds of heathenry. So that is the majority of what I've been working on as far as spiritual work, besides, of course, my daily spiritual hygiene, offerings, and things like that. The usual things that I engage in on an everyday basis. Most of what I have been working on has been a lot of writing, personal healing work, and making sure that I do the meditations that I need to do, the cleansing, the grounding, the centering, the shielding, all that spiritual hygiene work that's so core to making sure we stay healthy, just like taking a shower every day. And I've also been doing a lot more work of divination with folks and making new contacts in the community. So there's a lot of irons in the fire in the midst of my recovery, but not so many that I'm overwhelmed. And I'm starting to take more steps back so that I can focus on healing and in much more dynamic ways, still tend to the needs of the community that I'm part of, but also take care of myself at the same time. So Don't worry, folks. I am definitely working on that balance. So I am been very much looking forward to this episode, and I'm going to introduce our three guests. They are from Mother Tree Shamanism, which is led by a traditional Mongolian shaman who speaks fluent English. Twice a year, they teach a year-long course on Practical Shamanism of Nomads, beginning in February and September. It is a great opportunity to learn from a legitimate source, as much of the information they will share is not available in the West, as the tradition is generally passed on orally. If you're interested to learn more, please check out their Facebook or email them directly at mothertreeshamanism@gmail.com. Uh, really happy to have you folks on. Welcome, welcome, welcome to Isaac, Eva, and to Eddie. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Hey.
Thank you for having us.
Oh, absolutely. So, can each of you give like a very brief overview of how you came to Mother Tree Shamanism?
Do you want to go first, Eva?
How did I come to Mother Tree Shamanism? I had someone who was a former student recommend me to investigate it because of what I was working on at the time, which is a bit of academic work, but I was looking at different ways in which people have relationships with land and with the spirits of land. And so I was introduced actually to Isaac first, and then ended up taking the course. And it was like 3 weeks between the first introduction to you need to talk to these people to me ending up on the course. And I think that was 3 years ago. And I've continued to stay involved with teachings as well as with my own practices.
Excellent. So, Eddie, Isaac, somebody go.
I'll go next. I came to Mother Tree Shamanism sort of without knowing. I mean, I didn't know it was Mother Tree Shamanism at the time. I'd practiced core shamanism for maybe 3 or 4 years, and I'd made myself quite sick. And I went to Mongolia looking for healing, really, and yeah, I didn't know that a Mongolian teacher ran a course or ran any training. So I ended up in Mongolia first, and then found the community that way.
Awesome. Isaac.
So mine's a bit of a long story, but so I've been with my teacher since I was 20 years old, well, 21 years old, and I'm 30 now. So almost 10 years. First, when and honestly, it was just I had a compulsion. I had to speak to this person. I had to speak to them. And from then onwards, I've been learning from them, and I've been studying with them. And I've been around for but before Mother Tree Shamanism started to teach courses. And that is, in itself was a long process. Every day, writing down things from this oral tradition that was being taught. The concept would be explained in extreme depth and detail, and then writing it down and then sharing it in the form of classes. And a lot of this information's never been put in this format before to teach it to people.
Excellent. Cool. Before we go any further, I do need to make it very clear to the audience, I have actually taken the Mother Tree Shamanism introduction course that we just mentioned above. I found it incredibly enlightening, very fulfilling. I won't be speaking too much to my experience, partly because these are oral teachings and they belong to that culture, they belong to those teachers, and I'm not qualified to teach any of that stuff. And considering some of the sacrifices and some of the work that has to be done in order to be cleared to teach that stuff, I'm happy at the moment that that's not mine. So before we go too much further afield, what is Mother Tree Shamanism? Can we talk about what it is and what it is not?
That's an Isaac question, I say. Unless Eddie wants to answer it.
Isaac, why don't you go first, and then I'll chat.
You go first, Eddie, and then I'll go.
Well, Mother Tree Shamanism, very simply teaches authentic Mongolian shamanism. Um, and I think in the West, to learn from an authentic traditional lineage is sort of paradoxically a very rare thing, even though, Mother Tree Shamanism courses are available. But I think it's such a valuable opportunity, and these teachings are, really, really effective and very, very practical. And although, like we've mentioned, that they're from Mongolia and are traditional and native to that part of the world, they work incredibly well all over the world, and they've been put into practice by students internationally. And they're an amazing opportunity, not just for people interested in shamanism, but for people who are interested in spirituality in general, to get a really good, safe grounding in spiritual practice, in real and authentic spiritual practice, which I think, being a Westerner, it's like there's a limitless amount of spirituality that we have available to us now, and it's very difficult to pick the right path. Like I alluded to before, when I went to Mongolia, I was quite sick, and I'd picked a few wrong paths, really thinking that they were authentic. So I count myself very fortunate to have found Mother Tree Shamanism when I did. But for anyone that's looking to experience, real authentic spiritual practice, I think it's an amazing place to begin, and with an amazing community that's now, growing all the time, and it really is international, and it's also a very welcoming place.
Excellent. Isaac.
I would say, so Mother Tree Shamanism, as we mentioned earlier, was kind of taught from this oral tradition, but as times progress, people have begun to, like, a lot of people join the course not expecting it to have the same effect or the same sway in their own native lands. But no matter where you are in the world, these techniques and these practices can be adapted to our local culture and our local environment with similar results. And even I think Eddie can attest to this. When he went to Mongolia and saw it firsthand in Mongolia, and then saw it performed elsewhere in the world, he was very shocked in the fact that the nature and the power of it didn't diminish, even though it was outside of that cultural context.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'd been interested in shamanism for quite a long time prior to going to Mongolia, and I'd experienced different traditional cultures at work. And whilst there's many traditional cultures that have incredible practices, whenever those practices were performed by someone else who had maybe experienced or trained with those practices and then brought them back to the West, I always felt that there was something missing in terms of maybe their effectiveness or their practices that didn't do the original practices justice. And yeah, when I came back to the UK after being in Mongolia and experienced the work of the students of Mother Tree Shamanism, I was honestly quite shocked with how similar the results were.
And yes, to add upon that, like as Eddie mentioned, it's an international community that's been developed, and a community that supports each other and looks after each other in this practice, in this line of work, but also in day-to-day life and the struggles that a person may have. They're like, these teachings aren't applicable just for someone trying to be a shaman or learning to be a shamanic practitioner. Some people just want to practice it as a shamanist. So someone who believes in the traditions and knows how to navigate the world according to these traditions and these sets of principles that kind of underpin existence. And these sets of proven and tried and tested methods are applicable anywhere.
One of the things,
And I've seen,
sorry, Isaac.
I was going to say, I've seen many people that have had long-term issues in their life or long-term health problems, and by dedicating themselves to the practices that have been taught, their life has only had an upward swing, and things that they never thought would be resolved have ended up being resolved. Obviously, that depends on an individual, and that depends on the level of dedication they also put in. But things change for people when they listen and they do the practices.
I was going to say that one of the things that drew me to the course in particular was that I was very interested in sort of safety practices, like what is the way to do practices that doesn't get one hurt. And unlike Eddie, I was never a core practitioner, or actually I didn't even know what core was until after I took this course. But it always really struck me when I would listen to people talking about their spiritual practices and wonder about if they don't come from a lineage, if they don't have a history, if the place that they're in doesn't have that type of history, how do you know that if you've adopted beliefs from a different culture, or you've formed some syncretic structures around your spiritual practices, that what you're doing is not dangerous? And one of the things that really drew me in some conversations to reaching out to Isaac to learn more about the possibilities here was that type of question, which is something I feel like this course very much covers.
Yeah, I can say for my own piece, one of the things that I was very highly concerned about when I first reached out to the folks at MTS was, is this going to be compatible with my spiritual life? Like, I'm a heathen spirit worker. I have a role in my community, and it was very important that what I learned wasn't going to supersede, but also could be safely and well integrated. And I'm picking up on something that all of us have talked about, is like the issue of spiritual safety, of authenticity, and also of being able to integrate this into your spiritual life in a way that doesn't completely shatter everything, unless that's what you need. Uh, um, that was one of the things that I found most striking, is just how neatly the Mongolian teachings integrated into my life, didn't fight with any of the stuff that I was already doing, and also didn't eat my life. There's this really weird dichotomy in, I think, especially Western. I haven't gone over the pond yet, so I can't speak to how it is over in England, but or the UK more broadly. But over here in the States, some folks get into this it's all or nothing. Either I'm gonna like follow very little or do very little, or this is gonna completely eat my life. Now, as somebody who for whom his heathenry is the cornerstone of his life, it was really important to me that that not happen, but also that these two could flow in a way that complemented each other. And I very much appreciate that this teaching and this style of teaching isn't like throwing out the baby with the bathwater. It's like, no, you actually do need to integrate this into your life in a way that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's a really positive thing about true shamanism. Really, shamanism is the science of the universe, and true shamanism should give you a real deep understanding of universal law and how the cosmos works. And I think, we all live under that same law. So, other practices, if they're effective, they should be, that they should be supported by that.
There's a phrase that my friend Jim, who was a co-host of this show at one point for many many years, and co-founded the show. Uh, a phrase he would use he studied Andean shamanism from the Quechua people, and it was a Papa Masayuk. And one of the things that he kept as a refrain from those teachings was, "Can you make the corn grow? Like, can you actually get results? Is this something you're doing that feels good? Which is, okay, sure, but can you make the corn grow?" Like a lot of what we've already talked about so far, and what he was talking about with the Andean folks and their teachings, is that this spirituality is not just something that's up in your head. You actually got to be able to do things with it that have real impact.
Yeah, so that's one thing. Like, there has to be provable results from the practice, not just making you feel better, or if you do a divination, the answers need to be accurate. Whether 10 people do the same divination, the results need to be accurate. Same with the rituals. If you're doing a ritual, hypothetically, let's say, as you said, make the corn grow. If the corn doesn't grow, then the ritual's ineffective. And as you were all touching on about the safety, the reason that the safety's element is there is because this practice has been unbroken, like completely unbroken. So the safety methods, and through trial and error and the passing away of many people, has figured out what works and what doesn't work, and what is safe and what isn't safe. And that's one thing that I have seen, at least in some Western practices. These safety methods haven't yet been developed to a point where they are foolproof. Like, you could say a lot of these Western practices are in their infancy. They've only been around for the last 100 or so years. Or it's a rediscovery of ancient traditions from sources that have existed, but it's putting together the pieces of the jigsaw, where the safety methods with this tradition have been completely unchanged and figured out. This works. This is how you can do this process safely. So it makes it a much easier time to transition into that, or add it to your existing practice. It's not like you have to completely abandon your existing practice. It's applicable for all.
And
Go ahead.
that was such a breath of fresh air for me when I first experienced it, because coming from a core shamanic background, a lot of the shamanism or shamanic work or core shamanic work, whatever you want to call it, that I'd experienced was very much based on interpretation, often the interpretation of visions or dreams or journeys, or, and nothing was really for definite. Nothing was, that black and white. It was very much like, oh, well, interpret your journey, and what does it mean? And that led to quite a lot of blurred lines, I think, of, am I healing? Is this kind of, shamanism or psychology, or is it a mixture of both? Or, what's really happening here? And when I got to Mongolia, and it was very straightforward, very practical, either it's happening or it's not. And that was an amazing thing to witness.
Yeah, the concept that these are not metaphors. If you talk about death, if death comes up in a divination, it means death. It doesn't mean rebirth. It doesn't mean something new is coming your way. And that clarity of it meaning exactly what it says, I think is also quite refreshing and very clear. Like, it works or it doesn't work. You know or you don't know.
And it really took some getting used to, for me, coming from a very kind of metaphorical, dreamlike practice beforehand. Yeah, and and having some interesting conversations with our teacher about my interpretation of things, and really having to drill myself and retrain my mind into just dealing with reality.
It is one of those things, and I find that a very interesting point where I deeply appreciate the divination method you're taught is there's no hand wavy bullshit. It is what it says in the tin. Just for clarity's sake, you guys can curse if you choose to. I have a very florid language, so I pepper my speech because I live in Michigan and it's practically a comma where I come from. But the thing with the divination system and with basically the outlook is it's very real. It's very in this world, even if we're talking about otherworldly things, right? It's one of those things where, especially when you're looking at Western esotericism, there's this default to, oh, it's just all in your head. And these are practitioners who are saying this stuff. Like, you're casting a circle and you're summoning this creature and you're doing all this, but you're just expecting this to be just a mental head trip as opposed to something is supposed to actually show up. Um, which I always found really incongruous with how I saw things. Like, I'm a polytheist and an animist. Like, that mindset of it's just all in your head, none of this is actually literally real, never stuck with me. And it's one of the things that I appreciate about the Mongolian shaman teachings is there is that complete lack of separation of almost a safe, like almost a not even a safety net. It's a blanket, really, right? It's almost like if it's too real, we don't really know how to cope with it. I don't know if you folks experience this in the UK, but if it's too real, some folks wig because oh, it's really real. This is like has flesh and bone impact, and this can do things to me. Oh, it's not just all in my head. It's not just feel good. It's not just imaginal. This is like going to affect the circumstances of the world you live in. It's almost really hard to overemphasize that because so much of the spiritual teachings in the West are abstracted from daily life, right?
So I would say the one thing that so I never trained with core or neo shamanism or anything like that. But from my own experience, I've obviously helping to teach the MTS course, I've come across it many times that many people will have these abstract concepts or these abstract ideas of, as Eddie put, the metaphors that people use. But when it actually comes to you could say, the fact that it's real, some people are like, oh, so I have to be careful of these things. And they were like, so does that mean I should be scared? And I was like, well, at the end of the day, these things exist whether you believe in them or not. They will still affect you. Whether you know about them or not, they still affect you. And when you go to Mongolia, it's such ingrained into daily life. From the young children to the old people, like the elders, everyone has some basic understanding of how this world works and the way is to navigate their interactions with it. And it's so ingrained in the culture that you can't separate the culture from the practice. But then when you go to, let's say, the practice being used elsewhere in the world, it functions exactly the same. It's just because that's the way the world works. You drop an apple, it will fall. Same if you do the practice here, it's gonna, no matter where you are, it works in the same way.
So this sounds like a pretty big difference between traditional shamanism and core shamanism. So for those of our viewers and listeners who don't know what core shamanism is, because I'm actually really surprised that some of you folks didn't know what core shamanism was or hadn't experienced it until after you experienced working with MTS. That's bonkers to me because like core shamanism wove its way through a lot of the communities that I'm part of, and it's really hard to get away from. You have to do work to get away from it in some cases. So I'm really curious, partly because like traditional versus core, is this a useful dichotomy? What does it say?
Well, I think I'll take this one because the transition was quite a big deal for me. As I said, I made myself quite sick with core shamanism. And before I explain, I just want to sort of premise that when I say core shamanism, there's two versions in my head of core shamanism. There's sort of core shamanism proper, which was developed by Michael Harner and sort of rose to prominence in the 80s. And the FSS is potentially what can be called like a young lineage, at least the beginning of, there's a structure and a set of teachings. And then there's what I would call core shamanism 2, which is sort of a Western form of shamanism based around shamanic journeying and soul retrieval and ancestral healing in a sense of core shamanism. At least those practices, in my experience, don't resemble really anything like what the practices of the same name might be in traditional shamanism. So yeah, I just want to say that because I was the latter. I didn't train with the FSS. So I trained with a teacher who used core shamanic methods, but sort of had their own spin on it. And I think that happens quite a lot. So yes, and you know, my experience with core shamanism has been very different to other people's experience. You know, I've wrote about it quite a lot online and had, you know, different opinions. Some people have had very, very similar experiences as I have, and some people who, you know, really haven't. And you know, it's not my goal to offend or, you know, pit one against the other. But it was just totally different when I went to Mongolia. So different, in fact, that I wouldn't call what I was doing before shamanism. I think it was sort of, to be honest, in my opinion, kind of sort of ritualized counseling with an animist twist. You know, which sounds quite fun actually. And you know, parts of it were fun. You know, I met some amazing people, was part of an amazing community. I'm a city boy. It was the first time I'd spent a lot of time in nature with other people, and you know, it really, I got quite a lot of empowerment from it. But the problem with it being such a young practice, as Isaac has touched upon, is because it doesn't have the millennia of trial, sacrifice, error, and that safety net. Every now and then, people can get seriously hurt, which was what happened to me. You know, I just you know, ended up completely burning out and having some very, very awkward mental and physical symptoms that led me to Mongolia, where I experienced shamanism, true shamanism, in my opinion, compared to Western shamanism for the first time. And I was really blown away by the effectiveness of it. You know, I'd bounced around different healers due to the issues I was facing in the UK, and no one could give me a straight answer for, you know, about a year about what I was feeling. Everything was down to interpretation, or this might be happening, this might be happening. Within 3 days in Mongolia, I'd been seen, diagnosed, and fixed. And you know, talking about growing the corn grew very, very fast.
So, from my experience, whether I think it's a useful separation of between core and traditional, so from obviously, as I said, I didn't have any experience of training with a core teacher or studying with core. But from what I've observed myself, some people say they are night and day apart, basically. The traditional practice and the core shamanism, they share a same name, but when it actually comes to the practice and the levels of understanding, they're completely separate. They say, for example, well, it's a science. Traditional shamanism is developed to a point of where it's a science because it's had the trial and error. And along with that, it comes with medicine and it comes with so many different aspects. It's all interwoven, this view of how the world works and this understanding of how the world works to a profound level.
And I came into this, I think, from a very different point of view. I was raised very rural area with what I didn't know at the time, but learned later were pretty animist parents. So my worldview as a child running in the woods was pretty particular. But then I came into this as a scholar, so anthropologist, linguistic anthropology. And so I studied older texts. So we didn't really hit Harner because you wouldn't run into Harner if you were studying shamanism because he's not considered a reasonable source for it. He's a modern syncretic point of view. So you don't get there.
Right.
And I wasn't a practitioner, even though I had a long-standing, decades-long meditation practice. So what drew me into this really is both the lineage and the you know, the traditionalness of it, the ability to be introduced to people who would feed the curiosity from the academic scholarship and also the opportunity to learn more about it. I think in a traditional scholarship perspective, you're often the participant or the observer, but this breaches a wall that has happened a lot in scholarship lately where you become a practitioner. And so what you start to understand from the practitioner level is quite different. And when you're talking about esoteric experiences or capabilities or the experiential quality of something, or even down to knowing if it worked or not, this is something that you have to learn how to do by doing it. And having a proper teacher that can help you understand that really changes how you come to understand this. So I feel very fortunate that the world, threw me into this opportunity, because what I've learned through the experience of practicing and getting it not so right, or has been rather extraordinary, because not only do you see the clarity of the wovenness of the world, of the natural laws, of the science of it, in all of the ways that you learn shamanism, but not just the traditional Mother Tree Shamanism as sort of a thin line. As Isaac was saying, it's the entire world woven together. It's medicine, it's astrology, it's the way that you understand the natural laws of the entire world. And getting to learn that from someone who has an unbroken lineage, that this is a science, it has been tested, people have died in the process of figuring out how it works, much like the Western concept of science. I think it's just it's an opportunity to see the world in a way that is different. You can visualize it different. You can experience it differently.
And I would say here as well, a lot of people I've heard a lot of people ask, why would you want to learn something from a different culture? Why would you want to study something that isn't from your native homeland? That unfortunately for the most of the Western world, their traditions have been lost or have been interrupted or broken. And by studying this, it's like a breath of fresh air almost, in the fact that you can then navigate what is safe, what isn't. And it gives you an understanding of how people from different traditions or different cultures may have had their worldview in the past. These traditions, these safety mechanisms probably existed to some extent. But nowadays, obviously, because especially when it comes to Reconstructionism, is like it's from written sources, and obviously they're, as I said, putting pieces of the jigsaw together.
Yeah. So from my perspective as a heathen spirit worker, and to be clear, so that we all have a working lexicon together, I don't look at spirit worker as like a one-to-one to shaman. But I did come out of a neo-shamanic practice where the word shaman was thrown about quite a bit, and it never kind of sat right with me. And so spirit worker, it is what it says in the tin. It's a job title. It means you do work for the spirits. This can be gods, this can be ancestors, this can be spirits more generally. So from my perspective, coming out of that milieu and reviving heathen practices, part of what drew me to Mother Tree Shamanism, from my perspective, was, okay, I know there's stuff missing in this tradition. I've been doing this since '06. I know that, I've had 19 years, and all of this time I've been a heathen spirit worker. I know there's stuff that we're missing. I know that there's things that I have been taught that either don't feel quite right, or they don't have the effect they ought. So what am I missing? And one of the things that really helped was going, okay, so this is how this works in this system. I wonder if this is an analog. And one of the things that was really nice was being able to compare and contrast in a way that wasn't offensive to the home culture that I'm learning from, and from my perspective as a heathen, worshiping all these different gods, ancestors, and Vaithya spirits. A surprising amount of similarity, and a surprising amount of, okay, this practice needs to be tweaked in this manner. And a lot of lovely exchanges online back and forth, a lot of, whether it was with you, Isaac, or whether it was with any of the other folks that were in the class, the thing I never felt was that I was less than. And that was one of the things that really did bother me with a lot of neo-shamanic groups that I would run into, is this isn't about one-upsmanship. This is like, can you do this? Can you be safe? Is this effective? It's one of the things that was really refreshing when I came, because again, having seen enough of the communities over here, whether it's pagan communities, animist or polytheist communities, being mired in the core shamanism stuff, and it's usually the second of the two. I very rarely ran into somebody that took FSS courses themselves. A lot of it was derived stuff. So not even the basic safety mechanisms that were baked into the cake of the Foundation for Shamanic Studies stuff was present in some of these teachings, which I found out later because I didn't ever pick anything up from FSS. I think out of curiosity, I read Way of the Shaman on a lark, but I never practiced any of it. Which is like Michael Harner's seminal book on the subject.
Mhm.
And so one of the things that really struck me was not only the similarity of our pathways. Ooh, we're polytheist to animist. A lot of these concepts cross, even if they're not one-to-one. The other thing that really got to me was I could see where some of the holes in my own tradition are at. And I agree, as far as like, as spirit workers, like a lot of us don't have lineages, or if we do, it's like one or two generations and that's it. We're not there. Like, it's kind of like OSHA rules. They're built in blood. Like a lot of these teachings and safety mechanisms in Mongolian shamanism are literally written in people dying
Mhm.
or getting really, really hurt. It's kind of like the regulations are written in blood. Yeah, it's because if you don't follow these protocols, this can hurt you. And here's how. It was the explanations that also helped me a lot, because it wasn't just follow this teaching. It was, here's why. And it makes sense in this context.
One thing I would say is there's this general concept that I hear thrown around quite a lot, and especially on online forums and things like that. There's generally this idea that the spirits make a shaman. And that's one of the big differences in traditional shamanism. One of the big views is the teacher makes the shaman. So like there could be 100 potential shamans, 100. Out of those, maybe a couple will get chosen to be the actual practitioner. And when you see people, everyone probably who has some knowledge of shamanism will have heard of shaman sickness. Obviously, then the spirits and the calling is making the shaman sick. That's not making them a shaman until they learn to harness it and practice it in a safe manner and deal with these energies, and with the training of the safety methods, the training of the rituals and these techniques for accessing that power and that part. Then are they a shaman, or are they just a person with shamanic potential? There's a big
Ooh, I
difference.
like how you put that. Yeah. Because potential doesn't mean that you're going to pass. It just means you've got the possibility.
Mhm.
I like that. Would you say it is also more about it's a job title versus saying anything specifically about the person? I think this is something that comes across a lot in neo-shamanic and core shamanism derived practices, where they really put these folks on a pedestal. And it's like, it's not that let me be clear. It is not that Mongolian shamanism and Mongolian culture says you shouldn't have morals and ethics. But we do this really weird thing here in the West where they are, it's less about what you do and more about who you are. And I very much feel, and correct me if I'm off base here, like any of you, I feel very much like when you're taking on the title of shaman, it's like, can you do the work? Are you doing the work? Versus, um, you are some sort of big paragon, right? Like,
Yeah, I think there's a few things that spring to mind when you say that. I think, and again, it speaks to the massive cultural differences because, yeah, in the West, we see spiritual practitioners rise into prominence often because they're very charismatic, perhaps because they're very business minded, also, perhaps because they can play the social media game well. Maybe not really, perhaps because of the effectiveness of their work, which is, strange. which is obviously very different in a traditional society, as we've explained. And speaking on the ethics and morality, I think when I was around core shamanic communities before I went to Mongolia, and we'd speak about shamanism, everything seemed to come back to spirits. Everything was always about spirits, rituals, the sort of the magical element. Honestly, that's obviously a huge essential part of traditional shamanism, but I'd say just as big is the ethics, is how you are as a person, are the teachings on morality and understanding yourself, understanding not just the universe outside of yourself, but the universe inside of yourself, understanding your mind, how it works, who you really are. That is hugely missing, at least in my experience, in Western forms of shamanic practice, which ultimately I think leads to a lot of blind spots and a lot of malpractice, because not only do they not have the techniques like meditation to develop an awareness of who they are, and perhaps where their mind gets the better of them in a negative sense, but also a lack of elders who've been through that process, who can watch over you and tell you where you're going wrong. My old teacher sort of learned core shamanism, went out on their own, started teaching people. There's no lineage there, really, no accountability, and we're all humans. We are messy, we're not enlightened, and we will make mistakes. We will make mistakes, but if we don't have the awareness or the techniques to develop ourselves to the point where we can realize them, then it's gonna get us, other people, in trouble, in danger, and that's, I think, one of the things I experienced in core shamanism, where it made everything a bit messy.
I think in the West too, that a lot of people I see who talk about themselves as shamans are self-anointed as shamans. They choose to call themselves shamans, whatever their teaching was or however they came to be where they are, but they don't have elders and they don't have a lineage and they don't have an understanding of the world that might have come from traditional shamanism. And I think that there's a lot of confusion about what would make someone a shaman beyond saying they're a shaman. And it's exploded, I think, even more in the West recently, where you'll see advertising for, shamanic massages or shamanic this, shamanic that, and to differentiate from it as a marketing tool, which is more of that stuff and more about those who are engaging in some type of spirit intervention or behaviors or rituals, that there's not a known quality or an understanding of what's going to happen. And sometimes in some of what I've experienced, there seems to be a lack of self-awareness about how you fit into the greater picture. It's almost from my perspective, in the West, a lot of people want to be shamans. And I think in traditional cultures, and I think also with Mother Tree Shamanism, being a shaman isn't necessarily the best thing ever. It's really hard. You're going to sacrifice yourself for choosing this path. So it's not the shiny, happy, oh, I'm going to become a shaman and this is going to be amazing. It's a grueling life of service and understanding and training and teaching the next generation. That I think is that level of understanding, I think, is very much missed in a lot of the Western communities that I see.
Yeah, and
Like,
go on, Isaac.
one thing I was going to add here was, as both Eddie and Eva were saying, people in the West are generally self-anointed shamans. In the traditional cultures, they'd have the elders to kind of verify them being a shaman, and they'd get trained. And you're asking, is it a job title as well? So in Mongolia, obviously, the majority of people are shamanists. They will believe in it. They will live their life by this practice, but the shaman will be the one to uphold the morals, uphold the laws, uphold the kind of like status quo between the natural world, the spiritual world, and people. People will go to them when they need help, like you would go to a doctor when you need help. But the shaman has to be the most moral, the most upstanding, and really, it can't just be a daytime like career. It's a lifetime path. And they have to completely embody the teachings, not just be moral in speech or not be moral in this. They have to be truly moral individuals. And if they're not, obviously, because Mongolia's got such a strong shamanic culture, people will know. The word will spread. It's like, oh, don't go to that person. He's not very good. Like, he's not living by what he says.
So this is one of those places where when I was being taught these things in the class, I was nodding along a lot. In my experience of heathen spirit work, you really, if you can avoid taking on the moniker, if you can avoid taking all the shit that comes with it, good. Don't. It's one of those things which I think is very dichotomous between what people think, what they put in front of shamanism, or in my case, spirit work. They'll see like, oh, there's all these really shiny things you get to do. Like, yeah, and there's a certain way you have to live, and there's, the spirits and the calling that you're living very much runs your life. Your priorities have to shift as a result. Like everything shifts, and it flows around this, not around whatever priorities you might have had previous. And again, I'm not saying spirit work and shamanism are one-to-one to each other. It's just, it was really funny to me how many of my experiences matched up really well with the teachings I was getting because of things like that, where, for example, I've had that 3 a.m. call where somebody's in the midst of a spiritual crisis and you have to be ready to perform like, because somebody's life is in danger. It's get up, get your ass dressed and go. It's, people, I think, especially in the West, tend to attach a lot of really shiny ideas to shamanism, when a lot of it can be, like, for pretty frank, a gigantic pain in the ass. Whether you're having to stay up all night and do rituals, or you're having to do counseling work of some kind, divination at all hours of the night. Like, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes of these different spiritual lives that your average person isn't going to see. And, our old ethnographical accounts don't account for, because they weren't letting the ethnographers follow them around everywhere. It's one of the things that I wanted to pick up on something you said earlier, Eva, was that there's much more of a blending of participant and observant. And I'm here for it because it produces in my view, a richer anthropology. It was one of those things that I found really frustrating, because I was in religious studies back in 2012 as my minor. My major is psychology. And it was one of the things I found the most frustrating was people would speak on these things, but they'd have no practical experience with it. And I really appreciate that we've gotten to a point where some of those barriers are starting to drop.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, because you're talking about reality, really, and what's real. Back to what am I experiencing? How do I know it's real? How do I know it's not a projection of my mind? Did that thing really just show up in the room, or did I fantasize that? And I think that there's a very split mindset in the world of those who believe that these things happen and those who still do not. So the lack of spiritual connection, but then the newness of spirituality in a lot of Western communities means that people don't really know what these things are, or how to discern the difference between real or not real, or was that meaningful? Even not as far even as the Mongolian, there's no metaphor, it's real if it's real. Different traditions, there may still be metaphorical meanings or vaguenesses that you're having to interpret. But I think that there's a very big gap in trying to understand what an experience is and what it means. Comes from the lack of tradition in the West and the lack of elders and training and clarity about what it is. People are sort of stumbling through it. And if you're fortunate enough to find a good teacher in whatever a lineage, or, and I think for me in particular, a traditional lineage, then you have a different experience of the knowledge and you get to push the boundaries a little bit more. I remember at one point when we were being taught some stuff and some of us are like, I'm not doing that. It's like, no, you'll be fine. If you have to try it, it's okay to fail. You're not going to get hurt. Just do the thing. It's like, okay, maybe. And just having that extra push for those of us worried about what might happen to us or what's going to happen or how to even interpret what happens, having someone who could be like, no, this is what that means and this is what you did, and is a very unique and special thing to have.
Yeah, one thing I was also going to add here is, yes, being a shaman is a hard life of, it's not generally seen as the most favorable, but obviously I think that's the same with any person that's engaged in any spiritual work. But the thing is, these teachings are still applicable and can be beneficial to everyone in their life, even if they're not going on to be a shaman. In the West, we've kind of ended up in this, we've almost got, how would I put it? In traditional practice, you've got shamanism and shamans and shamanists. In the West, you've kind of got a third thing that's appearing, which is shamanic practitioner, which they kind of fulfill the role of a shaman for their community as well, but not an initiated shaman. So I was very fortunate when I was looking for when I'd been called towards finding my teacher. Unfortunately, I'm very fortunate that I didn't have to go through anything like Eddie or struggle or have any difficulty. But to put it this way, the level of training, I've trained for almost 10 years and probably another 15 years until I'm fully trained. So a long time. A long
Oh
time.
man, you mean you couldn't go to a weekend workshop and just do it all at once? Oh, what bullshit!
It's very
And I
un-American
think
of
this
you,
is it.
Isaac.
Ugh.
Very un-American. But yeah, it's the level and the depth of the teaching and the depth of the student-teacher relationship is completely something different. It's like having a second parent. And when it comes to learning with a teacher for a period of time, even over the course of a year, which the course is over a year, you can develop that connection with that teacher, that bond, and also asking questions. And I think Eddie has mentioned to me about this before, where in his core shamanic practice, when he had a question, it was just go ask your spirits. Whereas with the traditional shamanism, you can always fall back on the experience of many, many generations. And if the teacher doesn't know, they'll go, I'm going to go ask the elders, and they will probably know, or we can figure it out together. It's never a case of just go away and just ask your spirits. There's a whole process to understanding it.
So I would like to kind of pivot at this point, if you don't mind. We've talked a lot about the persona and the idea of shaman and shamanism. I kind of want to place it in context for folks who don't really have an idea of what the cosmology even looks like. So, some really basic questions. Who are the gods, ancestors, and spirits of shamanism? Are there more than just one set?
So obviously, there are many higher powers in traditional shamanism. From the natural forces in this world and the universal energy that underpins it, and the ancestors and natural spirits as well. And you could almost say the owners of these natural forces. But the ancestors take a big part, and honoring our ancestors and where we're coming from, even if we don't necessarily have, you could say, the best relationship with our ancestors. Because a lot of people in the West don't have a good relationship with their ancestors, or like even your parents are your ancestors. So even if you don't have a bad relationship, even if you have a bad relationship with them, you still came from them. So you should still have respect for them, the previous generations, and all the way back. You would, and in our bloodline, there will have been saints and there will have been sinners. There will be both sides of the coin. But you still wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for them.
I mean, statistically speaking, not all your ancestors are assholes. You gotta do a little work. But I like that you're just really straightforward with that. Um, so are there different kinds of higher powers and beings that specific shamanic paths would interact with, or in that area of the world, are they kind of all similar enough? For instance, the difference between Nepalese versus Buryat versus Darkhad versus, point at a different culture. I certainly don't know them all. There's a lot.
There is a lot of different shamanic cultures, but you'll actually, once you begin to understand the framework for, you could say almost the framework or the worldview of traditional shamanism, whether you go from Nepal to Korea, whether you go even looking into Buddhism or even Vedic, they all have this same underpinning kind of, well, framework, because it's how the universe functions. It's just the way the world works. And they have been unbroken, and the reason they work is because it's through trial and error again, the same way. So, yes, they may have different names. The offerings may differ based on cultural or regional, because shamanism's a regional practice. So maybe the food, if you were a rice growing nation, you're going to offer rice. It may vary a little bit, but the basic understanding and not even the basic understanding, the core is the same.
That makes a lot of sense to me. Um, Especially because here in the West, like you kind of gotta be really straightforward and blunt with people, because it's like, oh well, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. It's like, no, 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 no. Like, once you get the worldview, you kind of got an idea of where things sit. You're much better situated in how things unfold. Like, one of the things that people ask is, well, why are there shamans? And I think that's a valid question, but I think the worldview actually helps you understand why shamans exist, right? Can you speak a little bit to that? Is there something in the cosmology that kind of like brings rise to this, or is it like something that the certain categories of spirits just call for? Can you talk to that?
There is, but I'll let Eddie take that question in a minute. But one thing I would say is, it's like asking why there are shamans in the world would be like asking why there are doctors.
I like that.
I think, not to cut Eddie off, also that if you think about the role of a shaman as the mediator between the world, like between the worlds, they're the negotiator, they are what keeps everything in balance. That in a world where everything is alive, as opposed to the Western world where we have killed everything and stripped it of any type of beingness, that you always need someone who can know how to do the negotiation, who can have the conversations, who can work between the worlds to make sure they understand how to make everything work best for everybody. And that takes a lot of knowledge in the cosmologies that we don't really function with in the West anymore. So I think that there is that aspect to it. I would say from an academic perspective, the biggest difference between the different traditional shamanisms that I've seen is whether or not they use entheogens. So if you're using plant versus not plant, then you'll see certain differences. So there's some differences in South American shamanism because of the way that they use the plants to speak. That, again, I do not have any firsthand experience of that, but having read an ungodly amount of literature on all of these things and studied it for so many years, there do seem to be certain similarities. That doesn't shift how the worldviews work, or the role still as mediating, as the person in the community who is helping to solve problems and hold the world together. I don't know, Isaac, you and Eddie have a lot more experience, and I'd be curious to know if you think that this idea of the shaman as the communicator, the negotiator, the one that holds the world in balance, aligns with what you experience versus what I study.
I would say so, but one thing I would actually add here is, um, so yes, the traditions in South America, yes, they're complete traditions, and they're complete traditions in their own right, but they're the ones that use the entheogens. And shamanism, well, the word, it comes from Siberia originally.
Tungusic.
So yes, exactly. And because of that, there are specific features that make shamanism that some argue South American traditions would not technically fall under that because they do not share the same root. Same with, like you could say, Nepalese shamanism has the same root as Mongolian shamanism, Korean, Bon, all of these Central Asian and even some Chinese and further down south, Southeast Asian, and all the way to the Sami in Northern Europe, which migrated from Siberia. They all hold very similar features that do not appear in the South American traditions, which evolved independently. Though, saying that, some of the viewpoints and the core principles behind them are still the same due to the fact of it being universal law. But there are specific features in the practice that differ.
I think also important to add that shamanism was developed over many, many, many years. It wasn't just one day there wasn't shamans and then the next day there was. This was a community role and an ability and a skill that took many years of trial and error, as we touched on already on this podcast, to come into fruition. And in Central Asia, in these countries Isaac mentioned, it was developed to a very profound level, and I think that's also what sets it apart. Whether that's for cultural reasons, regional reasons, the environment, whatever allowed those living in this area to have the time and the need also to develop this to such a profound level, it sets this practice apart.
I think one of the things that really sets the Mother Tree Shamanism apart as well is the isolation. So even though there's, obviously Mongolia has been Buddhist, has been Soviet, that the isolation of it allowed the tradition to stay held together. And when you look globally at all of the different traditions and colonialism and the impacts of outsiders on these, that there's really a different quality to having had such the unbrokenness, the knowledge that comes with, and lesser pressures. I'm not to say that there were not pressures and problems because obviously, and if you look at Mongolian history, they were the same as other places, but the remoteness of the place itself, I think, has a different quality to how it's been able to hold together.
Yeah, my experience of the teachings was very so several years before I ever ran into MTS, one of the things that was really striking to me was learning that there's different kind of shamans. Like, so it would be touched on in documentaries, like, oh, this is a yellow shaman, that's a black shaman, but they wouldn't go really all that far into it. They would just say, oh, that's a black shaman, and I'm like, okay, what the hell's that? Right? Because they just got to leave you hanging. Because, you know, they have an hour and a half to get this documentary to say what it's got to say about this particular shamanic point of view, and then it's going to move on. So actually finding out that no, actually there's not only different ways that shamanism's come about, but like there's even different categories and there's different things that people do. Because again, one of the things that's a problem in the West is they think like everybody's got to be a fucking Swiss Army knife. Like, and that is just not so. It was actually one of the things that I was surprised to learn about a little bit because I had hints that there were different kinds, but you know, like The impression you get from the outside looking in until you're actually in the teachings is like, oh, it's all one way.
Hmm. Yeah, and even, each shaman will have specific specialities, often specific things that they prefer to do, or that they are, better at. And, looking at, again, even though the comparison really isn't fair, we're comparing a practice that's been around and developed for thousands of years to a practice that realistically has been going at most maybe 45 years. So, just to compare it in terms of, experiences that people may have had if they're practicing core shamanism. But you learn everything, everyone learns the same thing, over the weekend, or over the week, or over how the duration of the training. You sort of hit all the, you learn the soul retrieval, you learn the ancestral healing, you learn this, and this. And it doesn't have a chance, I don't believe, to develop as naturally as having, like Isaac said, that very close student teacher bond, or having the wise elder who is able to really read you as a person, and see what you are meant to be doing. And also, something which I think is very important is to understand the capacity of the practitioner. To understand they're not being taught things that are beyond their capacity, which will ultimately harm them or those they're working with. And for that to happen, you need a teacher who is able to read you, to understand you better than you understand yourself. And that's really important, really important.
I think that really speaks to the power of the traditional teachings, because it's oral, and you're, even though in the MTS structure, there's a course that we all take, beyond that, you're taught what you should be taught. So it's not, everyone learns the basics and that level of understanding, but it's really very much, as Eddie said, about the teacher recognizing what you need to be learning, what you should be doing, how you should be practicing, what your meditation path should be. And so you only learn what you need to learn, and you only learn it at the right pace. So I think it's a very big difference from the West, where everything gets written down, because it loses its contextuality, it loses its embodiment, it loses the momentary temporality of the importance of that teaching and how it actually works. And so there's a lot of uniqueness in each person being trained the way in which they need to be trained, as recognized by the teacher of where you are at that moment.
And I'll add to this in the fact that, obviously, as Eva said, that there is a standard course structure, but within that course structure, obviously, each individual comes with their own questions and their own experience. And because they each come with their own question and experience, then there will be answers given to that student for what they need at that time to help them progress on that path. So even though there is the standard course structure, it alters each time the additional information, because it's for what those students need at that time. And then you've got to bear in mind that this is coming from all of the teachers' experience, all their elders' experience, and all this unbroken experience, that they read each student specifically and then are able to give them the best direction for them to go in. Like, many people go from studying with MTS and they end up doing rituals for people. Some people just add it to their existing life to better their life and improve their health conditions, or improve their general existence in the world. Other people go on to study traditional medicine and many other aspects. And you end up seeing this whole diverse community grow, which are benefiting the people around them and their communities at large. And one thing I wanted to say, even though we're talking about the differences of core and traditional, it's not to disparage core, because at the end of the day, it's helped many people. Also, though, I have witnessed personally many core teachers, probably more along the lines of not Hana's school, but Hana adjacent school, even though many of Hana's student, like, what's the foundation called, Eddie?
FSS.
Yeah, FSS, that's it. Even though there's many FSS students and some FSS people that take the course and then continue to add this to their existing practice. We've had people from core shamanic backgrounds, heathen backgrounds, such as yourself, and we've had Buddhists, we've had people that come from more, I guess, like witchcrafty backgrounds, and it's been very varied. It's not been. We've even had rabbis and other people from different paths, which they've added it to their existing practices rather than it contradicting the practices that they had.
Sorry.
And you go
I
ahead.
think for me, like I'm going to speak to some specific terms for spirits, and where I see comparison and contrast. What's really important for me as a heathen, because you've got this general category of beings, spirits you call gods, and they're just these really big spirits, right? They are cosmologically significant. And one of the things that I found really nice is that I didn't have to fight with my worldview to bring the teachings in, partly because I kind of look at Tanger as a an analogous, maybe not a one-to-one, but analogous to what we might call a god. And then you've got, your land spirits, which is a really big part of my practice. And being able to bring in those teachings alongside the relationships I already have. One of the things that I've been talking with you folks, as well as with folks like David Shee and others, is one of the really interesting touchstones is the closeness I feel between certain classes of spirits, such as the Luce or the Savdog, and trolls, for instance, and various other Vatir spirits, Lanvatir, for instance, spirits of the land, spirits of water, things like that, where it may not be an exact one-to-one because of culture differences and experience of that spirit, but it feels like if they're not one-to-one, they're at least kissing cousins in a lot of cases. And for me, being able to say, okay, I can couch this experience in something I already understand, and these two worldviews don't fight with each other. There's lessons that I can take from this into my training, but there's also stuff from my training that speaks to things that are there. And it's one of the things that I appreciate that you're all kind of saying around the core shamanism thing with, like, no, this isn't traditional, but we've had people come in and they've brought their experiences and have gone forward. It's one of those things where having a shared lexicon is so important, and that's part of why I bring up like specific spirit categories, because a lot of our listeners will not have context for this at all. It's it's one of those things where it's the words are unfamiliar, but I think the concepts are very familiar for our audience. And again, it's not necessarily a one-to-one thing, because what I put under that moniker of God, some other people might put different verbiage or different ideas. But at least we're hitting somewhere close to the mark, right?
Yes. So one thing I would add here is that these spirit types are, again, the reason that you can see similarities between them is because it's how the world functions. Like, obviously, Mongolian shamanism has nature spirits, and the nature spirits are very similar to those that exist in Buddhism and those that exist in Hinduism. And even if you look at some of the comparable like spirit types, even in, you could say, Tibetan Buddhism, like there's a spirit type called the Sen. They fire magical projectiles, which obviously in heathenry you have the elves, which make you ill. And the spirit types are applicable and they are the same. Again, cultural differences may understand them differently, but it's a way of working with the forces that exist within the world no matter where you're from, even if obviously the culture may understand how they appear slightly different or their offerings, because it's a regional practice.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That openness to regionality was actually a really big breath of fresh air. Um, it's one of those things where it's like, oh, this makes sense for my context. And I think this is where I had some issues with core shamanism, where there was almost a universalizing of regional difference. And it's like, well, no, this makes sense for this context. This makes sense for that context. We can be speaking to the same thing while also respecting the regional differences, right?
Yes, but I would say the methods that are taught where they are. So, like, this is, for example, why you get, I'm sure you, for example, have Hindus practicing in the
Yep.
States, even though their tradition comes from India. It's because it works that way. Same with
Mhm.
shamanism, same with Buddhism. It works the way it works because that's just how the world is.
Yeah.
It doesn't, and people go, oh, it's supernatural. It's not supernatural. It's just natural. It's just the way. It's just the way the world
Right.
works.
No, and I very much feel that way, like for instance with the runes. Like this is part of why practically anybody can pick the runes up and do excellent magic work or do excellent divination work with them because it's how the world works. Yeah, I very much feel that from a very similar place. um
And also, I'll add, well, spirit types in terms of the personalities, may very well be regional. I think learning from unbroken lineages and practices that are based around universal law, you learn let's call it an etiquette of how to approach certain things and how to approach spiritual work, which makes these things much safer, much safer.
yeah, 100%. It's actually one of those things where most of my experience is in Western esotericism, specifically through paganism, heathenry, that kind of thing. And the amount of people that will just run out to go talk to spirits with no background, no understanding of protection or protocol is amazing. And it's one of the first things that I'll hit with workshops I put on, like for Dvergar, which are dwarves or trolls or practically any heathen matter. It's like, if you don't want contact, here's the protocols you need to observe. If you don't want them to enchant your shit, here's the protocols you need to observe. If you don't want them to steal your stuff, here's what you shouldn't do. Like, there's this really weird tendency in at least here in the States, at least in esoteric circles, to just go off, and I'm all for fucking around and finding out because experimentation is great. But there's no thought to safety in some of these experiments. Like,
Mm-hmm.
are you sure that's what you want to do with that spirit? You really want to go and throw stuff into the. I mean, okay, you can throw stuff in the water, but then you get to be responsible for the consequences of your actions.
Unfortunately,
Definitely.
these people don't know better, and it comes down to education. It's so important, and some of the very first things we learn on the MTS course, these are things that even children learn in Mongolia about just spiritual hygiene. These are quite simple methods and like simple pieces of information just to help you go through life in a more spiritually clean way, which will keep you out of more trouble. And it's not necessarily something that only shamans would know. These are things that help everyone, and it's amazing. My entire life has shifted from when I was like pre-Mongolia and then after Mongolia in so many ways that aren't to do with me being or learning to be a practitioner, just about going through life and understanding more and more about universal law, and okay, if I do this, this might happen, and if I don't do this, that's probably not going to happen. And yeah, it's shocking how we don't know this. We've forgotten it, and it's not our fault. But through learning, these traditions, which and teachers who we're so fortunate, to have the opportunity to relearn this.
We really are, because like talking to people that have been studying this for about 20 years or longer, they say only in the recent years have actually been traditional teachers actually been coming out of the woodwork to teach Westerners. And they're doing it out of compassion because they've seen people get hurt through their practices and their mistakes. Like, obviously, it's normal to make mistakes, especially when we don't know any better. A lot of what I've seen people say is like, there's this tendency to think everything is love and light. Everything in the spiritual world is light and happy. The problem is with that, you go to a forest and try and pet a tiger. The tiger's going to bite you. The natural world isn't all soft love and light. Or like you go and play with a rattlesnake, it's going to bite you. So why do people think that when you're dealing with spirits or doing spiritual work, it's any different?
I'm sorry, that shit just has me rolling because that is the exact thing. I've had that exact experience with somebody who was like, well, why can't I just go and make friends with this spirit? Well, maybe they don't want to be your damn friend. They're spirits, they're people. Some people are fucking cranky.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes for me, it took me going to Mongolia. When I entered the Darhad Valley, my viewpoint on spirits, energy, it all changed, because the Darhad Valley is alive in a way that I've never experienced any place. I listened to your David Shee episode, and he was saying the same thing. And when he was talking, it was making the hairs on my arms stand up, because it really is. It's so alive. I don't know how else to describe it. The air just is thicker. The land just really vibrates, and you see how these practices and traditions really work in the place where they have worked for thousands of years. And it's hard not to come away from that with a completely different view on these things.
I really appreciate that you've all made a point of differentiating between shamanists, people who follow the ideas of these traditions, and shamans. It's one of those things where I really appreciate the differentiation in language, because a lot of folks will be like, well, how do I become a shaman? Well, maybe you don't. In the vast majority, I mean, especially from this culture lens, maybe you should avoid it if you can.
Well, I think in traditional cultures, it is, people do what they can to avoid it, because it's a very difficult path, and that, that there's a big burden, to really, really be there for your community, no matter what, is a massive, massive responsibility. That, because we have communities in different ways here, it's hard to really understand that.
100%.
And it's a huge thing.
I think the other good differentiation, which is taking us slightly off, is actually to say there's a difference between a shamanist and an animist as well. Because the
Yes.
shamanist structure versus a shaman really helps understand that what you are versus that. But I think the difference between a shamanist and an animist is also important, because I would say from the perspective of Mother Tree, there's definitely a difference. And I'm like, and now you're gonna ask me to explain what it is, and I'm gonna do a really bad job of that. But I
Just give it a shot.
there's the animist worldview is that everything is alive, has agency. The shamanist worldview would say that there are higher powers and spirits, and it's not sort of uniform. there's a power hierarchical, there's an engagement, and there's a different way of engaging with powers at different levels. So it's
Yep.
not like I have to, animist point of view, have a relationship with a tree, have a relationship with a river. There's a greater structure to it. And that because of the ancestral relationships that come into shamanism as well, that you have a hierarchical lineage that you're also adhering to over time. I don't know if Eddie or Isaac would like to try and make that better.
Shamanism is.
I
Go on,
would
Isaac.
I would say with shamanism, you obviously have the animistic aspect as well. But I would also agree with Eva. There is this element of, yeah, there is elements of the hierarchy as well as there being just natural spirits. So there is, it developed from animism into shamanism. And this is why I'd say there's a difference between the two.
Agree.
Really quick, I wanted to check in, see how everybody's doing energy-wise, and if we needed to wrap up or if we could continue. I got a couple more questions, but if you're getting low on energy, that's totally cool.
I had a coffee, so I'm fine.
We'll do another couple of questions. I think we'd be okay.
Cool. Okay. So we've talked a lot about like the position that shamans hold. What is actually the requirements for becoming a shaman? Can we speak to that a little bit?
In a traditional context, the requirements for being a shaman is specific higher powers and a calling to be one, generally, or a connection to the specific higher powers.
In the vast majority of cases, someone is born a shaman. It's a life path that's already been set out for them by their ancestors, and yeah, so it's a very specific thing, actually.
But this is one thing that I want to add here as well, about the fact that yes, it's a very specific path, and normally it would be held by specific lineages or bloodlines. But in the West, obviously, we don't have the long history of unbroken shamanic bloodlines. So the answer would be, where can we start? And this is why we're ending up with this new emerging category, you could say. So obviously there's the shamanists and there's shamans in traditional societies. But in the Western world, we're ending up with shamanic practitioners, which are going to then go on and create their own new bloodlines. And they will probably become the ancestors that they will pray to. And then who knows, in 100 years, 200 years, we will have our own longer lines of shamanic bloodlines.
Spirits help us. It's going to be a ride.
But we're still in the infancy
Right.
of that. And that's one of the things, as I was mentioning earlier, even understanding it based on whether someone's wanting to be a shaman, wanting to be a shamanist, then it will benefit your life no matter what, because understanding how these natural laws work means that we can be prepared for engaging with them. Obviously, a shamanist would then still go and seek out the help of a shaman when they need help. They would have a basic understanding of how to treat themselves on a first aid level, or how to avoid certain situations that could potentially be detrimental. But when they really need hardcore help, they'll go and seek out a shaman. And I think when it comes to participants on the MTS course, some people go on to be shamanic practitioners, to go on and heal people or help people, and others, they just stay in the realm of being a shamanist. They're happy being there. They understand how the universal law works, and they can see the interconnections between it all. And they will try and master some aspects of it. Because the thing that I wanted to mention here is the stone, like the traditional system of divination that we teach. That divination method can be mastered by both shamans and lay people. So there's lots of aspects which are applicable to both shamanists, shamanic practitioners, and shamans.
Yeah, and I agree. And whilst a born shaman is a specific and rare thing, like Isaac said, being a shamanist and learning shamanism can have huge benefit, even if you are not a practitioner. My own journey, my sickness was self-inflicted because I didn't have the knowledge and ended up tripping myself up. And we talk about shamanism being universal law. Really, as a shamanist, having the ability to understand universal law and then how to cope with it, that's going to have huge benefits for you, your community, your family, your children, your friends, and that's massive. That ripple effect over generations will be huge, absolutely huge.
And even, so it will have a massive impact on those around us. One thing that should be mentioned, though, we're not telling everyone to be a Mongolian shaman. It would be impossible. So, like, I'm English, Eddie's English, Eva's American. So it'd be impossible for us to be a Mongolian shaman because we're not Mongolian.
Right.
We can. I can learn to be an English shaman, but I can't learn to be a Mongolian shaman because I'm not Mongolian. So even though we're trained in this tradition, it's to take it back to our own lands and our own area and our own cultural lens. So, for example, maybe things are different in our areas, and the offerings and the format of the ritual will remain the same. The practice will remain the same, but we will also potentially have to alter certain aspects of it. I am a very by the book person, so I do things. For me personally, I like things to be done.
Not you.
But it works the same, even in England, and it works the same in America. It works the same wherever you are. Again, because of this universal underpinning of the practice. But we're not saying by learning this you'll be a Mongolian shaman. No. You can learn it and apply it to yourself. If you're a shaman, you'll be whatever nationality you are. If you're an English person, you'll be an English shaman. But the one thing I was going to say, this course does not make you a shaman. It does not initiate you into it. If you are one, then it can be applied. If you're a shamanist, it can be applied. If you want to be a shamanic practitioner, it can be applied. Or no matter what practice, whether heathenry, whether witchcraft, no matter what it is, it can be applied to it. So for Eddie, I think how long have you been training with MTS
3
now,
years.
Eddie? Yeah, 3 years. So Eddie's been training for 3 years, and I think he can already start to feel the differences in his life and the benefits it's had on his life.
Hugely. I mean, not just mine, those around me, family, my wife, both of our lives have completely come back into balance. And, I didn't come to MTS already balanced. It was a really big journey, and the teachings have been, completely life-changing, and that's no exaggeration. So much so I feel like I have my life back, which there were big periods of time where I thought that would never happen. So I'm incredibly grateful, but my story's really not that important, and there's many people like me who have come to the training and been in more difficult situations than I was, and who have had really quite miraculous change from applying the teachings as shamanists. So I'm sure there's many testimonials that we could give.
Even for myself, like when I met my teacher, which I was very fortunate to meet her when I did, because it wasn't that meet them when I did, because it wasn't that accessible at that time, because the MTS courses didn't exist and none of the traditional shamans were teaching publicly. But I can say, hand on my heart, if it wasn't for my teacher, I probably wouldn't be here today. I probably wouldn't still be alive. I had many, many health conditions until I started practicing as my teacher had instructed. And from practicing it, all of them went away. All of them, which had plagued me for many years. My mental health, my physical health, everything improved. My financial situation, there wasn't a single part of my life that wasn't touched by the changes. And I think that in itself, and I've seen that happen for so many people. And as Eddie said, there's so many testimonials that we've seen of people's lives being completely turned around for the better.
So Eva, one of the things that I wanted to ask is your entry point really came through with academia in a big way. And I'm curious as to if first off, if your relationship to academia changed as a result, or if it kind of got deeper as you became a student, as you started learning things and applying things. Did your relationship to the academy, to your teachings, to your worldview and things radically shift, or was it kind of a adoption of something that clicked into place, or something different?
I think they're really separate actually, because it's really like living in two different worlds, two different forms of reality. Like I'm associated with British academia, so it's like the academy is very particular in how it deals with reality and citations and history. And even though there are scholars of shamanism, of which I am not, it's a strange thing to write about experiences that others will not consider to be real. It's an interesting struggle. It's a method struggle, which is probably quite boring to people on this podcast. So I will briefly speak to it. But the question is really, how do you rigorously study something that your audience either may not believe or that is experiential and happens once or maybe more than once, but it's more than anecdote, but how do you deal with the concept of what's rigor and how do you understand what's real and what's not real? I do joke sometimes that my PhD was actually the gateway drug to get me to Mongolia, because my entire life I'd been interested in Mongolia, but really wasn't intending on going or any connection to it. And it took me deciding to do a PhD, which was not about Mongolia at all, or this topic at all, that somehow or another became not about it specifically, but it got me into the realm, into the conversation with Isaac, and that led me to MTS. And so while I had these interesting conversations, my PhD went off in its direction, doing what it was doing. And I thought I was taking a course that it's now been 3 years. I still, do my daily practices. I've been to Mongolia twice. So it's kind of two parallel worlds that I live in, and I don't much talk about either one to the other one. I just kind of let them run on their separate pathways most of the time.
That's really neat, though. I like that you can kind of hold two worlds in your life like that. Hmm.
I will say from an academic point of view, my background is in linguistic anthropology, and what really interested me was how places hold language. Like, how do you have a linguistic relationship, a language relationship, sound, music, whatever, that resonates specifically with a place and
Hmm.
that plays back to you. So unique to a place. And I believe in that, but it's not something that you see in literature a lot, but you'll see it in history. You'll see it in Mayan cave rituals. You'll see it I mean, it's everywhere.
Right.
Anthropologists used to write about it and they'd say, oh, and they have a special language to talk to the land in this particular place. But then the anthropologists don't know what to do with it. So they ignore it and go back to being anthropologists, not dealing with land. And there's such a richness to it that I'm not sure that I'm necessarily meant to be cut out as an academic so much as my partner occasionally refers to me as a rogue scholar, because I want to write about these concepts that I think are very important. and the ways in which we relate to places as being a relationship, being personal, being language based or song based is
Mhm.
something that we've lost a lot of in the West. And so I'm very interested in ways of bringing this back to life, back to understanding, to help people learn how to listen to the place itself, to the, whether it's a deity or a spirit or the land itself is sentient and different traditions, different belief systems. And so I think that this is something for me that is very important to me. But as Eddie and Isaac has said, also the practices that have come from studying with MTS, the meditation practices, the ancestral practices, the awareness practices, both of myself, sort of the detecting of the interiority of myself, as well as the way of listening and being in the world, have added a lot. So there's a richness that crosses the two sides of my life. But I do, at this point, still kind of run in two different bodies.
Honestly, with the way academia works, I think that's very fair. As you were talking, I was really struck by thoughts of like place names in Old Norse mythology and Old Norse sources, like Helgafell,
Yeah.
for instance, or um, when I was doing research for my troll workshop and I started working with the trolls years ago, one of the frustrating things is I kept seeing these references to places that had troll names in them, but then they'd never list what the damn things were. Like nobody would take a troll as part of their name. It would be like somebody would name themselves, oh, Thorbjorn, like Thor's bear, or uh, the Striker bear, or something like that. And so that would be part of like how you relate to the god, but also there'd be like a place called like Odinsve, which is Odin's sacred place. Um, but then you'd get into these little minute ideas of like around Alfar, for instance, or trolls, and they would say things in like little sources like, "Oh, well, there's about 100 places with the name troll in it but they won't elaborate." And it's like, it's one of those things where you're missing something, and what you had to say really kind of speaks right to that feeling of the land is trying to connect with you through every means possible, language included. Has that been something that you've experienced?
I think it's also really notable that we're studying in traditions that are not our first language. And
Yeah,
with that language comes a worldview and an understanding of the world. And that to understand these concepts, you have to really understand the word. And in translation, you might not understand them.
right.
And they might be simple words, compassion, like all these things that have a long, long history of the philosophy underlying them, of the belief system, the things that you can feel in your body, that because we weren't raised feeling these things in our body, I think to Isaac's point of, being born into a world that does rituals and cares for the world and understands prayer and structure, we I specifically wasn't born into something that has a lot of this stuff. So trying to understand concepts that are so foreign that I might not know what the word actually means because I can define it in English, but there's no relationship between the English word and the original word. And I think part of the studying of place, of learning to listen, of studying with teachers is to realize that you actually don't know what the words mean. And you just continue to dig into those layers of it. Um, and try to figure it out. If you look at some of the traditions that are in the United States, all these places had names before people came along and gave them different names. And all of those names have meanings. And those names often came from the land themselves. But when you try to translate in and out of the different traditions, you lose a lot. I don't have an answer to that. It's just an awareness of how complicated it is. And that learning to be able to listen to the place itself, you might get more information from it, or who knows, really? You are on mute.
Thank you. So there's a project that I and some other folks who are of the animist, heathenish kind of bend are engaging with in the land, and some of that is taking cues from the cultures who originally live here. Uh, so we have a couple of living cultures that still occupy this area, specifically from the Iroquois, the um, Fox, the Haudenosaunee. the Potawatomi and Ojibwe, and a lot of these are from the Anishinaabe language family. And so one of the things that we're taking with getting to learn how to relate to the land again is like, okay, so did they have a name for this river? What was it? Why might they have had that? One of which I can't recall the name offhandedly at this moment, but translates something to the effect of Smoky River or something like that. And so I was like, oh, interesting. I wonder how we might translate that into, say, an Old Norse neologism. What's the word for smoky? It's raker. Um, so things like listening to the people that live here, whose descendants are still around, listening to the land itself, all of this to me makes a lot of sense of living with land connectedness and actually getting to know the spirits of the land as opposed to, well, I'm going to keep calling it, say, the River Raisin or the Huron River. Uh, there's so much depth when you start digging in, even on just a linguistic level.
I think too that part of learning to listen is learning to listen with more than your ears.
Oh
Because
yeah,
there's such a simplicity of like, oh, you listen with your ears, you speak with your mouth, but these are not the ways that you need to mash all of the senses together. And there are more than five. And how do you tie all that together to have that relationship? And I think it comes back to trying not to break things down into small enough pieces. Don't break it into five senses, break it into a level of understanding or how you do that. And I think that's part of the relearning, not just of what land is and the relationship that we have with it or with the deities or the spirits, but how do we actually understand what the human relationship is and how do we tie those in?
that's a really good point. It also kind of makes me sad because some of these places, which have a really long storied history, we literally can't swim in them anymore because they're so polluted. Uh, I think one of the things that you kind of got to watch out for around here is like, are the algal blooms getting nasty again? Like, you've got to watch that because it'll kill you. Um, and so, like, some of the ways of relating to the land are harder on a baseline level because you can't just go down and fish or swim in it. Like you got to really mind your p's and q's with some of these water sources because they're no longer safe. If they ever were safe to begin with, this is just one more way in which they're just not safe anymore.
Yeah. If they were ever safe to begin with.
Right. So something I kind of want to pose to the rest of the group is, and I'm sure all of you have different experiences with this. What are some signs for shamanic calling? Like we talked a great deal about how illness can be one way, but are there other signs that people should pay attention to and maybe think about when the time to maybe get some divination done and talk with a traditional teacher is coming up?
It's very difficult to say on, a podcast. I think the most practical
Absolutely.
the most practical way is for a person to contact a lineage holder, you know, like through MTS, and to ask them directly, and they'll be able to know. Problem with saying different signs and symptoms is some of those signs and symptoms appear without there being a shamanic calling as well. And I
That's a really
think
good point.
yeah, it's so common for people to think all mental health issues are shamanic calling, certain physical health issues are shamanic calling, when in reality it's different. Those things may be part of it, but so yeah, it almost feels irresponsible to say. The best thing someone can do is talk to a authentic lineage holder who will be able to find out for them.
Also, I would add here as well, the tendency as well that amongst people that I've encountered, they have a very strong attachment to being a shaman if they feel like they've had a awakening, which isn't always the case. And it would be better for them to, so you can offer them help, but not everyone is willing to accept that they haven't. obviously there are cases where there is a person that needs to go down that path, or there is a person that's been practicing for a long time with none of the elders or traditional lineage holders to verify or not verify what they have been working with. And I know that's a commonplace thing amongst the West, and I've seen it many times. People have been working with things that they don't know what it is, because you throw the net very wide in the hopes that something will contact you. So there are many signs and symptoms that could appear, but they can overlap with not necessarily the spirits that you want to be connecting with. It can also overlap with some of the energies in the body becoming imbalanced, which then need to be rebalanced via traditional medicines, or they need to be balanced via rituals. And in some cases, after that is done, then it will go away. This even happens in Mongolia. Like, people think, oh, maybe this is a shamanic calling, and then they go to see a traditional elder, and the elder's like, no, let me sort this out for you. And they're like, oh, I feel much better now. I can go and live my normal life.
So when it comes to a lot of this, because people don't have a lot of this context, and MTS is one of the very few people that has traditional elders actually willing to teach. What would you think are some red flags people should watch out for if they're trying to learn?
One of the red flags that I would say is you should know who your teacher is. You should know who their teacher is, and you should be able to find out about them, basically. Like in the olden days, obviously now it's much more easy with accessing it online, and people have the tendency to jump from teacher to teacher, or find this teaching or find this course. The problem with that is there's no real seeing if the teacher lives what they practice. Like, they live what they preach. Like, have they installed the teachings? Do they live by that? And I think as well, one of the things that most people don't expect from traditional teachers, because in the West we have this idea about a teacher being very soft and being very gentle. Traditional teachers are no nonsense. Like, they are very direct with what they think, and they will, if you're messing up, they will tell you straight. And the reason for that is because it's out of care. Like, they're like, I could let you continue doing this and you might hurt yourself, or I will tell you why what you're doing is not necessarily safe, and try and guide you in a safer way to do what you want to do, or point you in the path of going somewhere. But honestly, it's like the big red flag that I've seen is a lot of people claim to have a traditional teacher, and some of them do have traditional teachers, but have they been trained by that teacher? Just because you've gone through a ceremony of initiation, or you've gone through a specific ritual to initiate you, or to bond you to a specific spirit, it doesn't mean that you know or have learned in detail and in depth. It just means that you've gone through a process.
Right.
Unless you've spent time with your teacher long term, or over, like, even with a period of a course. On MTS, we teach the most important things. We can't even cover a fraction of the knowledge that's covered, but we teach what people need to know in the West to safely practice specific rituals and specific understanding that's essential to a spiritual practitioner, that can be applied to any practice. Well, when it comes to red flags, again, the main problem that I've seen is people not living what they say.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, because we can't verify that by ourselves without knowing the teacher for a long period of time. We have to go on recommendation.
Gotcha.
So I would say generally recommendation is the best way probably to find a legitimate teacher. And unfortunately, there are teachers out there. Luckily, I know out of the big traditional shamans like Bola and MTS, these teachers both have really good standing and live what they preach. For the others, I can't obviously verify it because I don't know them.
Yeah,
What about you, Eddie?
I echo the same sentiments. I
What's up?
think, for someone who is looking to find a teacher, Facebook groups can be very beneficial. Facebook group Three Worlds is a great group. There's lots of very knowledgeable people in there. There's regularly testimonial posts and people posting their own experiences, and so that can be a really good resource. Reaching out to people who are also trusted, who might not be teachers themselves. People like Nick Breezewood, who runs Sacred Hoop magazine. He's always made himself very available for people who are interested in finding out some more information. And everything
Well, it was how you found
that
MTS,
was
wasn't
exactly
it?
how I found MTS. Yeah, I reached out to Nick and explained my situation, and he really hooked me up with no hesitation, and I'm really grateful for him. But other than that, what Isaac said, I personally, from my own experience, would only, if you really want to practice, I would really, or learn shamanism, I would learn from someone who is part of a tradition that still practices shamanism or has practiced shamanism for as long a time period as possible, because the unbroken lineages are the most impactful in my personal experience.
I think I'd say from the other perspective too is to think about what the student is looking for. Lots of people look for many teachers. They look for fast. They look for easy. It's like, how quickly will I become a shaman? How quickly will I know this? And I think there's, if you find the right teacher, there's a level of dedication to your teacher and responsibility you have to your teacher to act in the right way as well. And to stay, to work it out. Learning is hard. I think we take for granted almost that it should be like, oh, and then I'll learn these things and it'll be fine. But it's actually a very complicated, very difficult way to really understand the world and yourself, that one should be cautious when looking for a teacher, not just for the teacher, but also for how you're approaching it and what your purpose and point of view is.
I would completely agree with
Really
Eva.
good. Yeah.
Like, one of the things that I think people come away from the traditional teachings, they expect to have mastered everything by the end of the course. So obviously, I can only speak for MTS. I don't know about other traditional shamans, but people are like, "Oh, I should have mastered this ritual. I should have mastered that." But for a good example would be some of the rituals taught on the course, I didn't learn until 5 years of solid practice. So I've heard it said by participants that it's literally enough, and it genuinely is enough, really, that you could dedicate and learn your entire life, even though it's all shoved into one year. I would, and I'm assuming it's the same for other traditional teachers as well.
It's interesting because with a lot of the red flag question, you peppered in a lot of the green flags that people should be looking for. So I appreciate that, because that was going to be a follow-up question is, okay, we've got the red flags out of the way. What are some green flags? Are there any green flags that we may not have talked about just now that you should look for?
I Hmm. I would say the green flags probably are a good way of avoiding the red flags.
Yeah, absolutely.
If a person is claiming to have practiced traditional shamanism, or they're claiming to practice any form of traditional spirituality, and you look at their life and they really don't apply it, their life isn't what they say. So, like, if someone's telling you to be compassionate and they're not compassionate, then that's obviously they're not living what they're teaching. If a person is saying, do this or do that, do what I say, don't follow my example, then that's obviously a really bad sign.
I agree.
I think one should expect that having a good teacher is going to be work on behalf of the student as well as the teacher. Which is not a green flag or a red flag, but I think it's just the awareness that um it's not magic, right? You don't meet a teacher and feel the, sparkles of chemistry and I found the one. It's work on both behalves to figure out if you've got the right match and then doing the work. And I guess I bring this up on the green flag side because it's just a way of having one's eyes open and not expecting that there's going to be some sign necessarily that like, oh, lightning will strike. This is my teacher. That you have to expect that it will take work to figure it out. I think, Isaac, you said in the beginning, it's like you watch them for a year or 2 years before you decide that this is the right person. And so you have to do the discovery, you have to do the digging to find out if they're the right person for you, through connections, through asking, through watching, through assessment. And each of that adds the information to get you to the point where you're like, yes, this is the person I want to ask to teach me.
I would agree, Eva. Also, one thing I'd say is another green flag that I would definitely put there is your teacher being honest, even if you don't want to hear it.
Mm-hmm.
That they can be, if they're telling you honestly the things you need to improve or the things you need to stop doing, and they're being direct and honest with you, it's always in your best intention. And that's a real green flag. I know, yeah. For example, people have turned to me and said, before they found a traditional teacher, they've spent 20 plus years practicing spirituality. And it was only since they found a traditional teacher in the last 3 years have they actually made big life changes, and they've actually changed as an individual and a person. Like, even for me, there's things that I've done. One example is I had certain things that I was overly attached to that were holding me back, like insecurities, you could say. But my teacher told me straight and guided me through that, and it's been nothing but improvements. And also a good way, actually, of seeing how to avoid a teacher, a bad teacher, is people look at the parent, people look at the child to see the parents, people look at the students to see the teacher.
Mm-hmm. Also, maybe this would only come with time, but through practicing with that teacher, does your life improve? Very simply, I followed my old teacher's teachings to the T. My life got worse and more difficult and harder, and then started to get harder for the people around me and more difficult. My experience with MTS has been completely the opposite from the beginning. Just better, more stable, easier, better, more stable, more clarity, and it's just night and day, and that builds trust also over time. So, you know, maybe you won't know straight away, but pretty soon afterwards, I think through doing some of their teachings and practices and experiencing them as your teacher for a little bit, it'll be much easier to work it out.
I think when it comes down to it, when it comes to like what is being a shaman about, like what is this life like? We've talked a lot about how we have so many different misconceptions. Um, I mean, because ultimately, being a shaman, from what we've talked about during this whole thing, is really about service, right? It's really about serving your community and it, serving the spirits. And I kind of look at that as like the community and the spirits are kind of like intertwined at this point because you're serving kind of both of them through this work, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. Um, because the idea is just to the way that I understand this and that I'm processing a lot of this is like through the idea of you are serving. The the point of a place like MTS is to ostensibly serve a community of people that need the guidance and need the direction, right?
Yes, and it's also to benefit the local communities of each of the
100%.
individuals. I would say from MTS, a community is formed around it that each individual is then going off into their own local area and benefiting their local communities, their life, their family. And people have had dramatic changes in how they deal with the situations that arise in their life. Obviously, everyone has difficult situations or difficult situations, good situations, but it depends on how you can handle those situations as well.
It does, and but really, before you can realistically serve anyone, you have to rebalance yourself. Um, and start by serving those closest to you. You know, if there's, make things right with your family, with your close ones, with your own household, and then, start with those closest to you. And bit by bit, step by step.
Did you have anything you wanted to add, Eva?
Nope.
Awesome. So I really appreciate all the time that you all have shared with me tonight, all the insights into your own journeys and into your work with MTS. I also really want to express my appreciation to Mother Tree Shamanism for setting this up as a whole and for the opportunity that I had to learn. I really appreciate that you all were willing to be vulnerable and really um, join in this conversation around this digital sacred fire and just be really authentic and open. Uh, I also really want to emphasize with folks that something that has been kind of threading through our conversations is that these are just like three examples, and mine being a fourth, of how these threads can tie into your life. They're certainly not the only ones, but my hope is that as people leave us off with this episode, that they have a better understanding of Mongolian shamanism and the ways in which it's conducted, and that it can bring perspective as well as be a perspective that may be quite revolutionary to your life. So I really appreciate being able to sit down with all of you and have this conversation.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for inviting us.
It has been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hopefully we can do it again sometime.
I would love that. So,
Oh yeah.
oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. So before we break, I would like you all to plug your pluggables if you have them. Where can folks find you? Where can folks find Mother Tree Shamanism?
Isaac, do you want to start?
Mother Tree Shamanism you can find on both Instagram and Facebook. So generally, they're also, if there's any teachings or any pilgrimages to Mongolia, they will be in 3 World Shamanism or some of the other shamanic groups as well. But they will all be posted on MTS's official website, official Facebook page. I mean, sorry. For myself, I only have my own personal account, which is Isaac Wortley, which you can maybe find. I'm not sure how easy it is to find.
And yeah, for me, if you want to get in touch and have a chat about anything we spoke about today, it's at Eddie Elsey, which is EDDYELSEY on Instagram.
And I am also on Instagram, EK Barbarossa. And I have a webpage, but it's really out of date, which is Eva Barbarossa. Though I keep swearing I'm going to update it, but you can find my writing and books and stuff there, as well as some links into the scholarship. But I'm always happy to geek out on anything. So yeah, shout.
Same.
Isaac too.
One thing I wanted to add as well was this is only a brief, obviously, touching upon what shamanism is, because a lot of the information is obviously passed on during the course, and for the course there is a process of evaluation for the new students. So generally it's kept within that community and also within the communities of those around, because to respect the traditions that are being shared with us, not to overly publicize them. It's not to sell them or make money on them. It's genuinely these are sacred traditions that are passed down, and generally there is a level of secrecy that is passed on with these traditions as well. Eddie, would you like to add anything about that?
I think you hit the nail on the head. It's not our place to, share many things about, these teachings and the way that MTS works and information that's in the course and beyond that. But yeah, hopefully our personal experiences have sufficed.
I will add that I think maybe Sarenth, you said this. I think that the 4 of us as the sample body of students of MTS is actually quite narrow. That the breadth of people that take this course that study, gender, nationality, age, background, interests, spiritual practices is really quite broad, and the community that's come out of it is really quite fabulous. And there are so many different types of people and interests that if you're listening to this and thinking, oh well, I'm not like those people, that the community is much bigger than the 4 of us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, because one of us is from heathenry, one of us is from academia, one person from a core shamanic background, and yeah, very mixed. But it's much broader communities.
Well, I really appreciate all your time tonight, and I really appreciate the work that you've all put in, not only to be here, but also the the work that it took to get this show together. And I know that Isaac, it's really late in the evening for you, so I appreciate that. And likewise, Eddie. As far as our pluggables, I'm going to plug ours now. You can find us at aroundgrandfatherfire.com. Our Patreon is patreon.com/aroundgrandfatherfire. You can find us on Facebook around Grandfather Fire. You can also find us on Blue Sky now and Instagram. Instagram is agf.podcast, and the Blue Sky is agfpodcast.bsky.social. You can also find us on Threads through this. For myself, you can find my work at sarenth.wordpress.com if you want to commission me for divination, or if you wish to commission me for making prayers or topics. You can hit me up there at patreon.com/Sarenth Odinson. Streaking Fate for Emily, you can find her at streakingfate.wordpress.com. And for our good friend Snow, co-host, you can find him at snowthegoth.com. So I really, again, want to thank everybody who has joined us tonight. I want to thank everybody, including the Tinger, the gods, the spirits, the ancestors, all of you who made this possible. I want to thank all of our listeners, all of our Patreon supporters, all the people throughout all the different podcasting platforms who have helped make this show what it is. And I also want to give a special shout out to our Discord community. You can join it for free. You do not have to be a Patreon member to join. And I really appreciate everybody coming together for this episode. And I want to thank you all for joining us. We will see you all next time around the fire.
Thank you, everyone.